Who should control the internet? The original version of a bill in the U.S. Senate would have allowed the president to disconnect private sector computers in an emergency. A new version of that bill allows the president to declare a cybersecurity emergency. Joining us to talk about that is Greg Nojeim. He's senior counsel at the Center for Democracy and Technology. Thank you for joining us, Greg.
It's a pleasure to be here, John.
Now, tell us, for those people who don't know about this legislation, what exactly is the reason for this?
Well, the justification for the legislation is that there have been a number of security incidents where people have done denial of service attacks and other kinds of attacks on critical infrastructure. And there's some concern that it could be vulnerable to attack.
So these are the attacks we hear about, say, on the Pentagon, which some people have blamed on China, that sort of thing?
Yes, and they found malicious code in the information system that runs the electric power grid. These ought to concern Americans. They're very serious things.
What is the threshold of an event like this that would trigger the president actually taking action here? It sounds like it would have to be something very critical, like some kind of terror attack.
What the bill says is that the president decides. The president decides whether there's an emergency or not. The president decides what computer systems constitute critical infrastructure, and the president decides what the national response will be. He directs the national response. One of the problems with the bill is that it gives the president a lot of power, and there's not a lot of strings attached to that power. It's not clear just how far the president could go.
And I want to get into this later, these problems with being declared a critical industry. But before we do that, let me ask you a little about the changes in that legislation. It sounds like some of those changes were brought up because of concerns that the first bill just went too far.
Right, and they did. They improved the bill in the second draft in a number of ways. First, they removed a provision that would have allowed the Department of Commerce to essentially seize any data that it thought relevant to a mission as a cybersecurity information clearinghouse. Well, that was a big problem, that provision, because it could have been interpreted to allow Commerce to override privacy statutes and seize email, for example. That provision is gone. Another provision would have allowed the president to actually limit or shut down internet traffic to a critical infrastructure system. That provision was taken out, but that other provision was put in to allow him to direct the national response. So some specific improvements have been made. They're significant. But some additional ambiguities have been added, and they're significant too.
And that ability to direct the national response, isn't that just another way of saying he can shut down the internet?
I think it's just not clear. And one of the things that we've asked the sponsors of the bill, Senator Rockefeller and Senator Snowe, is to clarify it. One way to clarify it would be to say that what the president can do is limit internet traffic to federal systems, to federal computer systems. It makes sense that there ought to be that power in the government to limit traffic to its own systems. But when it comes to directing the private sector to limit traffic to its systems, that's a whole different game.
And the concern rises if you are declared a critical industry, right?
Right. Once you're declared a critical infrastructure industry, then, for example, you have to hire certified cybersecurity professionals to run your information systems. And you could be shut down in an emergency, possibly. It's not clear again from the redraft, but it's clear that there'll be new controls on critical infrastructure under the bill.
Is this bill just, in your opinion, too vague?
I think that the bill needs more specificity in some areas, and in some areas it ought to be changed significantly. I don't know where the legislation will go. It's not clear what the drafters intend with some of the vague language, but it is clear that it's raised a lot of concern in the private sector about what its role will be should there be an emergency.
Who's pushing for this? Is this something that President Obama is pursuing? Is this something that began under the previous administration? Where is this drive coming from?
The lead sponsors are the pushers of the bill, Senators Rockefeller and Snowe. Senator Rockefeller chairs the Commerce Committee. He has the power to move the bill forward. He's also on the Intelligence Committee with Senator Snowe. What's not clear, though, is what the White House position is on this legislation. To our knowledge, they didn't ask for it, and here it is, and it seems to be out in front of the White House. Remember, the White House released its report on cybersecurity, I think it was in late May. And now here we are a few months later, there's no cybersecurity advisor at the White House. And so it's not clear that there's even a person there who could take a position on the legislation.
To happen with this legislation?
I expect there to be more give and take at the staff level before the legislation is taken to a committee, and then it will be marked up. I do think that the legislation will be moved forward, at least through the Commerce Committee. Whether it comes to the floor or not is a different matter. I should mention that there is other legislation to improve cybersecurity. It focuses just on government systems, and it will come from a different committee, the Homeland Security Committee. And there'll be a debate about which bill moves forward or which provisions of each.
Well, we'll have plenty more time to talk about this in the coming months, it sounds like. Greg Nojeim, Senior Counsel for the Center for Democracy and Technology, thank you for joining us.
ABC News Now, good to know.